Some persons never die. Time to warm up. Look at the posters and read the sentences. Great people talk about ideas. Average people talk about things. Small people talk about other people. Time to know. Great men are great as they have great power over their own minds. They have conquered their own selves. They are free from the bondage of selfishness. They are free from greed, pride, anger, and envy. They have malice to none and fear to none. Great men are great as they are great in service and sacrifice. They sacrifice their all and even their lives for the moral benefit of mankind. They live as a hero and die as a martyr. We remember these great people not only for what they have done for themselves, but far more for what they have contributed to society at large. Mahatma Gandhi is well known as the father of the nation, or Bapu. Because of his greatest contributions towards the independence of our country, he was the one who believed in the non-violence and unity of the people and brought spirituality in the Indian politics. He worked hard for the removal of the untouchability in the Indian society, upliftment of the backward classes in India, raised voice to develop villages for social development, inspired Indian people to use Swadeshi goods and other social issues. He brought common people in front to participate in the national movement and inspired them to fight for their true freedom. He was the person who converted people's dream of independence into truth through his noble ideals and supreme sacrifices. He is still remembered for his great works and major virtues such as non-violence, truth, love, and fraternity. He was not born as great, but he made himself great through his hard struggles and works. He was highly influenced by the life of the king Harishchandra from the play titled as Raja Harishchandra. After his schooling, he completed his law degree from England and began his career as a lawyer. He faced many difficulties in his life, but continued walking as a great leader. He started many mass movements like non-cooperation movement in 1920, civil disobedience movement in 1930, and finally the Quit India movement in 1942, all through the way of independence of India. After his lots of struggles and works, independence of India was granted finally by the British government. He was a very simple person who has removed the color barrier and the caste barrier. He also worked hard for removing the untouchability in the Indian society and named untouchables as Harijan, means the people of God. He was a great social reformer, an Indian freedom fighter who died a day after completing his aim of life. He inspired Indian people for the manual labor and said that all should sacrifice oneself for living a simple life and becoming self-dependent. He started weaving cotton clothes through the use of charkha in order to avoid the use of Videshi goods and promote the use of Swadeshi goods among Indians. He was a strong supporter of the agriculture and motivated people to do agriculture works. He was a spiritual man who brought spirituality to the Indian politics. He died in 1948 on the 30th of January, and his body was cremated at Rajghat, New Delhi. 30th of January is celebrated every year as a martyr day in India in order to pay homage to him. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. lost his life trying to better the lives of African American people. He was one of the greatest American civil rights leaders of the 1960s. He was born in 1929 in the city of Atlanta, Georgia. His father was a minister at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. At 15, Martin Luther King Jr. was enrolled at the Morehouse College. He graduated from there in 1948 and like his father wanted to become a minister, Martin Luther King Jr. married Coretta Scott in 1953 while doing graduate work at Boston Graduate School. They had 4 kids and they were together until his death. In 1955, he completed his work at the Boston Graduate School and got his PhD. By this time, Martin Luther King Jr. was a well-known civil rights activist who was attempting to get rid of discrimination and to overthrow the unfair segregation laws in the South. Martin Luther King Jr. making a speech to some of his followers. In 1956, a bomb was thrown onto the porch of Martin Luther King Jr.'s house. Again, in 1956, another bomb was thrown into his porch. Luckily, both times the bombs did not explode. In 1956, King was also arrested on charges of hindering operation of buses without legal cause. In 1958, he published a book called Stride Toward Freedom. The Montgomery Story. In 1960, the King moved to Atlanta with his family and becomes the co-pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, his father's old church. In 1962, Martin Luther King Jr. was convicted of leading a march in Albany. He made a famous speech that is known as I Have a Dream speech. That speech was an inspiration to millions of African American people. Martin Luther King Jr. led a protest against segregated buses. It started when an older lady named Rosa Parks, who is now famous for not giving up her seat, was arrested. Martin Luther King Jr. was a very powerful speaker. He knew how to lead protests and how to get people involved. He is the main reason for the equal rights between the races that we have today. King was elected the leader of a group called the Montgomery Improvement Association. After the protests started by the Rosa Parks issue, Martin Luther King Jr. encouraged others to boycott the segregated buses also. After the protests ended, angry white people tried to kill Martin Luther King Jr. by bombing his house. The attempts were unsuccessful. To make the battle against nonviolence stronger, Martin Luther King Jr. and many other African American ministers formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Martin Luther King Jr. waving to his fans. During the 60s, young African American college boys started sitting at the white tables. The protests were broken up by the Southern police, who used police dogs. The violence and drama of the protests was shown on television, and President Kennedy proposed a bill to deal with this to Congress. Soon after the segregation laws were withdrawn, Martin Luther King Jr. walking with follower. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was giving a speech in Memphis, Tennessee, called I've Been to the Mountain Top, in front of a huge crowd, when an escaped convict named James Earl Ray shot him. The speech was for striking African American garbage men. He died on April 4, 1968. The assassin was convicted and sentenced to only 9 years in jail. Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was a great woman who is always admired and respected by the people all over the world for her amazing works and achievements. She was a lady who had inspired lots of people to do impossible works in their lives. She would always be an inspiration to us. This world is full of good people having great humanitarians, but everyone needs an inspiration to go ahead. Mother Teresa was unique, one who always stands out from the crowd. She was born on 26th of August in 1910 in the Skopje, Macedonia. She was named as Angus Gonja Boyju as her birth name, but finally she got another name of Mother Teresa after her great works and life achievement. She had spent her whole life by caring poor and sick people as a real mother. She was the youngest one child of her parents. She was born in a highly religious Roman Catholic family. She was highly inspired about the charity from her parents, who were always supported needy people in the society. Her mother was a simple housewife, however, father was a merchant. The financial condition of her family got down after her father in death because of the involvement in politics. In such condition, the church became very important for the life survival of her family. At her 18, she felt that there is a call for her towards religious life, and then she joined the Loreto Sisters of Dublin. In this way, she had started her religious life to help poor people. Sarojini Naidu. Sarojini Naidu was born in Hyderabad on 13th February 1879. Her father Aghore Nath Chattopadhyay came from Brahmanghar, a village in East Bengal of undivided Bengal. Her mother's name was Varada Sundari. From her early years, Sarojini showed signs of her extraordinary talent. She began to write poems in English language from her school days. At 13, she wrote a long poem, A Lady of the Lake, 1,300 lines in 6 days. At 13, she also wrote a drama of 2,000 lines in English. While at Madras, Sarojini passed the matriculation exam at the age of 12, obtaining a first class from the Madras University. In 1895, Sarojini was sent by her father to King's College London and Girton, Cambridge for her higher education. But she returned to India without a degree. At the age of 18, although her study of English literature and her personal contact with the literary world in London was of far greater value than mere academic distinction. In her later years, she became a member of the Royal Literary Society, London, and was conferred the degree of doctorate by many universities. In 1898, Sarojini married Dr. Govindarajulu Naidu of Andhra Pradesh. In 1902, she met Gopalakrishna Gokhale, who inspired her Congress. Since then, she sacrificed her poetic creations for the sake of her motherland. Later in her life, she came in touch with Gandhiji, with whom she visited London as a delegate member of Indian representatives who attended the Round Table conferences held in London. Sarojini Naidu became the president of the Congress for some time. She took active part in the civil disobedience movement and also the movement launched by Gandhiji against the salt laws. Sarojini was arrested and sent to jail. She suffered further imprisonment in 1940 when Gandhiji launched a campaign of individual satyagraha against participation in the war, and again when mass arrests were made over the Quit India resolution passed by the Congress. India won her freedom on 15 August 1947. Sarojini Naidu was made the governor of Uttar Pradesh in recognition of her selfless service to the nation. In 1949, Sarojini's health began to fail, and on 2nd March 1949, Sarojini Naidu, better known as the Nightingale of India, passed away. Reading the lives of the great men is a great virtue and a great benefit for us. Reading the lives of great men makes a noble impression on our minds. By reading their lives, we follow their example and thereby we make our own life sublime. Lives of great men can guide us to the right path. So we should read their lives regularly with due care and attention, so that we could be inspired and motivated.